Talk about this for some time. Zeal and enthusiasm. The best definition I found was that zeal is great energy or enthusiasm in pursuit of a cause or an objective. And I want to show you today how important it is that we have this in our lives and that we focus it properly as Christians. Now, of course, this sign here, I put a black background because it's black on white and it's been on the fridge in my house, which my wife put there for so long that it got doggy and I threw it away recently. But it says, I try to take just one day at a time, but lately several days have attacked me all at once. And I'm sure of late that's what it's felt like as well. But really, these are the kind of prayers we say when we get up in the morning or before we do. So far today I'm doing all right. I've not been grumpy, nasty or psycho towards others. I've not whined, complained or cursed. I've not eaten unhealthy, fattening foods, nor indulged in glass after glass of wine. I've not craved chocolates, but I'll be getting out of bed in a minute. And I think that I will really need your help then, Lord. So you see, a lot of this is attitude, the way we approach life, the way that we think, and the way that we think has a large degree of effect on how our day turns out, on how our life turns out. And I want to put it to you that some famous people say some important things about zeal. Zeal is not a word we use. Outside of religious circles, it's hard to find too much to do with zeal. Zealotry is obviously a word linked to religious zeal, and it's not done in a complimentary manner. Zealots are usually people you want to avoid. And when you have a zealot in the church, you usually want to try and keep them in some sort of corner so they don't upset everybody. So, zealotry, fanaticism. There was a day when I used to think it was nice, great actually, to be called a fundamental Christian, but being called a fundamentalist today is not such a good thing. So we have to change our language to do with the times that we live in. And we're living in these times where we need to be more modern in our explanation. So I put enthusiasm there, which is entheos, God in you. It's got the meaning of having God in you, to be enthusiastic. And I want to show you on a number of stages just why this is important and why we should consider it at the Rock in our way of doing church and in our lives outside of church. So, Winston Churchill said, success is the ability to go from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. Challenge to challenge without losing your enthusiasm. The real secret of success is enthusiasm. That's Walter Chrysler, who, of course, was the builder of the Chrysler motor vehicle. And somebody named Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's a philosopher, American philosopher, said nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm. So, you can either have this experience, having every day hit you one at a time, or perhaps you can have this experience, which is a little happier. And it is true that in Psalm 69:9 and John 2:17, it says, the zeal of your house will consume me. It was spoken prophetically about Jesus, and it was observed by the apostles that the zeal of the house of God consumed Jesus. So Jesus was consumed with zeal. He set his face like a flint to Calvary. I don't know how you can be enthusiastic about such a terrible ordeal, but he was. He was enthusiastic because, as I said in the definition, he had great energy and enthusiasm in pursuit of his cause and his objective. So it's important to achieve anything in your life or mine that we're enthusiastic about it. One of the first things I learned back in 1975 when I joined the life insurance industry, an industry I passionately believed in and still do today, even since just before Christmas, and I've been on holiday since then. I've had 3 claims, serious claims, well over $2 million for people. One's died, one's totally disabled, the other one's got Parkinson's. I still passionately believe in a service provided by a product at low cost. But it's an invisible product. You can't sort of explain it's manual or automatic or green or blue. It's invisible. You just have to sort of be enthusiastic about what it is you're talking to people about, because in Australia we're not that really, fanatical about life insurance. So this is the 70s. and neither was it popular in church, I found out when I started doing what I did. But I was enthusiastic. I wasn't the most intelligent. I certainly wasn't the most experienced. I was young, looking for a career, and I've done it for 42 years, so today I'm financial planning. But I noticed going through all those early years how many people came that were better than me. They believed passionately, and they seemed to have more qualifications than me, but they failed. They failed constantly. The drop-off rate is enormous in our industry. Maybe 2% of people succeed. Even today, it's very hard. You can go through all the university, you can get degree level qualified, you can join our industry, and you can fail. And it happens in my office. I have 6 planners. I've probably been through 20 to get those 6. It's one of those things. And when I look at the differences back then, and I even notice it today, the people with a passion and an enthusiasm and an eagerness to get out there and do what it takes are the people who make it, not the people who have the university degree. Now, I noticed that in the business world. I also noticed, and I'm supposed to be giving you another slide, which I'll give you now. I'd like to talk about zeal and charisma. I've got a number of topics relating to zeal. But I got saved in 1970 in the midst of what we now know to be called the charismatic renewal, which swept the UK and the rest of the world. And it was mainly confined at that time to the denominational churches. And I got swept up in a movement that I wasn't looking for. I wasn't intending to have anything to do with. I actually fought tooth and nail not to get involved, but my friends were falling like flies. And for some reason, these worldly people that I hung out with and thought were mates were starting to get saved. And one in particular wouldn't leave me alone. And his enthusiasm for what he found was infectious. And it got to me. And when I joined the church, I got infected too. So I became enthusiastic, way more than I am today, about knocking on doors and going down the street and playing guitar and doing all sorts of things, because those were the days when that everybody did that, and I learned to play guitar back then. But those days were important also because during that period, and it was a Baptist church, I might add, that sang old school choruses, 60s, 70s type choruses, but we still thought there was something about it. It was just atmospherically very engaging. And I had a real life, true blue experience with Jesus that transformed my life totally from what I was to what I became and what I've been ever since. But during that 4 or 5 years while I was saved, before I came to Australia, I also learned that there was this other creepy group of people called charismatics. Now, the serious people you should avoid were the Pentecostals. But the charismatics were the interim people. They were the ones who prayed in tongues and did the kind of stuff, but they did it in denominational churches. And I kept bumping into these people. And they were the strangest people. They were so enthusiastic and passionate about everything they did that it was hard not to listen to them. And we used to talk about them all the time. What about that weirdo? Do you see him today? His eyes were shining. And the one was saying, yeah, his eyes were shining. Because their eyes used to shine. The interesting thing was I got baptized in the Holy Spirit and prayed in tongues in 1975, 1974, and all the eyes went out. All the lights in the eyes went out, and I never saw that again. But I actually could pick a Pentecostal in a group. I just don't know why. I've never understood that. Just something weird about me. And I'm going to say, that guy's something. I go over to him and say, do you pray in tongues? Because you could say that kind of thing. And he'd go, yeah, I do. And then he'd start to tell me all about it. And we did everything to try and experience this, and it wasn't until I came to Australia. My first experience in Pentecostal churches scared the life out of me. They had people falling on the floor. They had somebody saying prophetic things, which I didn't know were words of knowledge, but they were telling people they had things wrong with them. I'm going, what's going on here? And it was just strange. And they were putting their hands in the air in all the sorts of ways, you know. And it took a while. And because I wasn't filled with this, I think I was filled with the Spirit because I was hungry. But I didn't pray in tongues. And because I didn't want to seem weird, and there was a lot of young people in the Pentecostal church I joined, so I just did all the things they did. I clapped and I danced, and I put my hands in the air, and to the point where they all thought I was fully one of them, and I wasn't. I felt like an outsider, so never assume that just because you go through the motions, you've got all the goods, because I was hungry for something more, and it wasn't until one day I was brave enough to come out and get prayed for that something like a dam broke, and it all changed for me forever, and that was 1974. So, zeal and charisma brought revival to the world. Now, it was a godly thing. It was something God did. It was just something that happened, and it happens periodically. We had it in the 90s with the movement from Toronto and from Pensacola, and I went to both of those places to check them out. And I was immensely impressed with all of it. Not the radical stuff, crawling on the floor, clucking like a chicken and acting like a fool. All that stuff is, not really, doesn't work for me. But the sense of the presence of God and the lives that changed and the overwhelming just atmosphere that is in a room where the Holy Ghost is moving. It's just, there's nothing like it. It's something I want to experience again and again and again. So zeal and charisma and the charismatic movement was very important in my early days as a believer. I learned at work that I needed to be charismatic, whether I felt like it or not. There's a sign in my office that says, put a smile on your dial and fake it till you make it. And that mattered when you're working. It doesn't matter if I feel good or not about talking to people. I have to do what I do. And it doesn't matter whether I'm feeling good, bad, or indifferent. If somebody has a need or somebody asks me a question about the kingdom, I've got to be Jesus on the spot. It doesn't matter how I feel. So I learned that very early on, so now it's not hard for me. If it's hard for you, it's just something to work on. Now, zeal and Jesus. Now, I don't know, we don't always think about this in terms of Jesus' ministry, but he was very zealous because it was commented on in John 2:17 that the zeal for God's house will consume him. And he was enthusiastic to the point of being offensive. He was, especially down on the religious leaders of the day, enthusiastically down. Just read what he said about the scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites over 7 times in Matthew 23. He wasn't holding back a punch, but he was making a point. And he wasn't speaking to them. He was speaking to the people who felt the same way, but nobody was brave enough to say it. And he was saying the things that needed to be said. And it did cost him something. But the zeal of God's house consumed Jesus to the point of going to Calvary, to the point of dying and being raised from the dead and ascending into glory. So I'm forever grateful that the zeal of God's house consumed Jesus. Zeal consumed the early church. And I think we know that it did because they changed the world in their lifetime, and we read that. But I'm not sure we understand what it cost, how it was done. It wasn't like today with technology that you can talk around the world. I can talk to my kids anywhere by an iPad. I can find my family in Europe, in England, and talk to them like they're right in front of me with no lag at all. What we do today, we can, I had a friend stay with me over Christmas, Philippine pastor. He's been my best friend for years, and we ran a church together many, many years ago in the 80s, and it was extraordinary. It grew extraordinary school. We had a wonderful time together. And that was when computers came in, because I got my first computer in 83. And I said to him one day, I'm getting a revelation. It was like an epiphany, how God can be everywhere at once. Because if you've got enough computer screens, you can see the whole world. And so I had this image, and I made a bit of a deal about it, because it was really an epiphany about miracles. I'm going to sound very, I'm going to get stoned in a minute, but, the things we do today are miracles to the people 100 years ago. The things that medical science can do today are miracles compared to the Middle Ages. And what's a miracle but an advance on natural? Just an advance of something that we don't understand yet. We're not tuned in to get. I don't know. Anyway, that was my theory at the time. So please forgive me if that was my theory then. I'd forgotten about it. And he came and stayed and said, "Do you remember when you told me that you could understand God because you understand computers?" And I go, "Yeah, I remember saying that," and I did too. But it's not like that today in the early church. They didn't. Jesus never traveled more than 200 miles from where he lives. Probably not even that. And so, it was all word of mouth and people talking to people and a relational thing that we don't have today because we hardly know our neighbours. But it was a relational thing back in that day. And I know we can communicate by Twitter and by Facebook, and we can get things done that way too. But we need to be enthusiastic like the early church was enthusiastic. Paul said in 1 Corinthians 9, I do all things for the sake of the gospel, that I may become a fellow partaker of it. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize. So what does Paul do? I run so that I might win. He was enthusiastic and passionate and largely responsible for helping coordinate the early church. So there's nothing quite like having a vision and a purpose, as it says in the definition, for the things of God, and a desire to build the kingdom. Now I want to put a thought in your head that I want to finish with in a few minutes, which is that because we talk about building the kingdom, you think that you've got to be an evangelist. That's the first thought that comes in your head, and I hope today to dispel that completely. Because I'm not an evangelist. I've led many, many people to the Lord, and I think I've been involved in people getting saved and moving on in their life in ways where I've been part of a process. I'm positive about that. But you could not say I'm an evangelist by any stretch of the imagination. I teach, I preach, I can do things, but some things I don't do well. And evangelism was something I did as a teenager, and I never really liked knocking on doors, even as a salesman. So, I found other ways to share my story than upfront evangelism. And I want you to hold that thought, because I'm going to explain what that means in a moment. So the early church, without a progressive vision, the people perish, it says in Proverbs, which infers that unless a group of people are unified and under a common banner for a common purpose and with a clearly defined strategy and goal, they won't succeed. So that's for a body of people. So as a body of people, we need to understand that we have a kingdom message that needs to get out there. We have a story to tell, and that people may or may not want to hear it, but it doesn't matter, because people don't always want to hear what's good for them. If it wasn't for somebody selling something to somebody, we would still be on candles. But somebody came along and said, I've got this incandescent light bulb and I think it'll change the world. And it was hard to get that thought through to people in the day. New York City is built on a grid, and it's built on a grid, and what was put in place in massive doses was places for horses, so that the horses could be looked after. And that was just before the horse disappeared completely and the motor car came along, because nobody thought it was going to change, and it did. So what we need to do is remember that we need to get our message across, and we need to do it in a way that people are listening. And nobody was listening about the horses dying off at the time that New York was redesigned. Now, so the early church was very goal-oriented. Look at Matthew 28. Matthew 28 is the Great Commission, and it's commission given by Jesus to set us on the path to extending the kingdom. And I believe we need to do that with some enthusiasm. So they had vision, purpose, passion, enthusiasm, and they were determined to fulfill their God-given mission to populate heaven. They were determined to do that in the day. God touched them in such a way that they were excited about everything they did. So I think we need to learn how to communicate that message ourselves. Just one more. Let's try again. Oh, here we go. We've gone to the end. Shall I finish? Here we go. Let's try it up here. God in the scriptures. Let's try that. There we go. It says this in the scriptures, 2 Kings 19. For out of Jerusalem shall go forth a remnant, and out of Mount Zion survivors. There's more to this, but I'm just keeping it short. The zeal of the Lord will perform it. So it was the zeal of the Lord that was going to perform the remnant coming back to Jerusalem. Whatever is commanded of the Lord in Ezra by the God of heaven, let it be done with zeal for the house of God and of heaven. These are just Old Testament, but it's confirmed in the New. Isaiah, and he put on righteousness like a breastplate and a helmet of salvation on his head. And he put on garments of vengeance for clothing and wrapped himself with zeal as a mantle. And one more. Psalm 69, for zeal for my house will consume me. The Bible's full packed of examples if you want to search it on Google or something. It is the zeal of God or the zeal for God that accomplishes great things. It's the zeal of God or the zeal for God that accomplishes great things in this life and in our church life. It gets the job done best and soonest and inspires men to achieve extraordinary things. Let's have a look at the church today. Why are we so enthusiastic about dating, ball games, concerts, birthdays, Christmas, new babies, movies, or so many things, and yet struggle to be enthusiastic about the church? And I think nobody would deny that's a fact, church. You know, it's hard. By the way, I've got shorts on today. I've got to say this is the first time in 30 years, or forever, that I've worn shorts when I'm preaching. Tony disappointed me today. I had long trousers on. But you know, the chairman of our board preached in shorts last week, and I was greatly inspired by that. And in 35-degree heat, going out doing something, I didn't want to be in long trousers. So I hope you know that I've got my best shoes on. All right? They're expensive shoes, bought at Port Douglas. And my best shorts, which are new. And these hairy legs are all mine. Okay? So, bit of levity. You could follow our example, Terry. I've never seen you in shorts in church either. And Sean's not here, so we can get away with anything till he comes back. Where was I? Yes. Now, sometimes, I'm reading a little bit of this because I don't want to miss anything. Sometimes the local church is at fault and we must decide whether it will ever change or whether we should stay or leave. But at other times, it's us. That's what I was about to say when I mentioned chairman of the board. Is because, you know, motivating people to get involved, motivating people to take responsibility. It's a hard job in any church, and the Rock's no exception. And my encouragement to you is to be enthusiastic, to want to be involved. God wants you involved, there's no doubt about that, and for your sake, whatever church you do choose to belong to if you're visiting, being part of the kingdom, it doesn't cost you anything. Not really. I know it's supposed to be a sacrifice. I spent my life, you know, being involved in the church. Being involved in leadership levels in various ways, being a pastor. And I have never found that it's been detrimental to the rest of my life. In fact, it makes the rest of my life seem like it has purpose. And I've tried many times to sit on a back seat and to just be invisible. And it's really, really hard for me because I see something that needs fixing or something I could do or something I could be involved with. And Kate says, say nothing, do nothing, you know. Especially we're visiting, but I can't, you see, because I'm dedicated to kingdom first and foremost, and I want to be involved and actively participating in whatever happens in the growth of the kingdom without being an evangelist. I'm involved in evangelism, I'm not an evangelist. There's a difference. So, let's have a look at zeal and evangelism. The great task given to the church today as a whole is evangelism. The great task for you as a believer and for me as a believer is evangelism. Populating heaven with what we do. That is our great task. It's the Great Commission. But in order to do this effectively, we must endeavour to do three practical things. Number one, identify those within its members who are especially gifted by God to win men and women to Christ. Identify the men and women who are specially gifted. When I was young, I was gifted in doing that because I was young and I was just out there. As I got a little older and, my skills changed. And I found I was more effective in other areas where other people weren't. Second one, devise programs which will enable those who are gifted to fulfill their role. And thirdly, mobilize the remainder of the people to serve God in their particular areas of expertise and calling. I'll read the last one out. Mobilize the remainder of the people to serve the God in their particular area of expertise and calling. For many years I've run an office with quite a lot of people. And there's only been one me, and these days there's a few more planners like me, but there's a whole bunch of people who don't ever get involved in the kind of advice giving that I give. But without them, I can't do my job. Without them fulfilling their role, I don't fulfill mine. I don't want them doing my job because I need them to help me do my job, because we're a team, and we're a very effective team. So my philosophy is this. We all have zeal for something. We all have zeal for something. If you don't want to go down the street, hit somebody on the face with a Bible and tell them you need Jesus or you're going to hell, or whatever variety of that happens these days, because it used to go like that, something like that back in the 60s and 70s. I remember doing it myself. I'm not sure I was very successful, but I tried it. I was down the street in Wollongong once with Warwick Marsh, a friend of mine back in the day, and we were walking down, and of course it's so many people from Cringilla and Port Kembla who didn't speak English, and these people came along, a bunch of kids, and they started speaking in Polish or something. So Warwick walks up to them and started talking to them in tongues, and they sat and listened to him and stood, and when they'd finished, he walked off. And he said, well, it was worth a try. It was worth a try. He just thought maybe they could understand him, but they didn't have a clue. They were just being kind. So we all have zeal for something. It's one of the basic building blocks of life, which is part and parcel of our human genetic code. We have enthusiasm for things that we enjoy being part of. If someone doesn't have zeal for anything, we consider them to be lacking, boring, unattractive. It's better to be enthusiastic about something than not to be enthusiastic about anything at all. Seriously boring people, you medicate them, or you worry about it, you lock them away, you think they'll hurt themselves. Seriously unenthusiastic people don't want to live. We need to find our, what's it called? That thing that we have. Mojo. We need to find our mojo. We definitely do need zeal. Nothing happens in life unless someone somewhere sells something to somebody else who may or may not have been looking for it at the time. In my case, I had an invisible product, life insurance. You know, in my case, as a Christian, there's so many similarities. I have an invisible product. I can't show you heaven. I can't give you Jesus. The Holy Spirit's invisible. I have to find other words to paint a picture, to tell a story, to articulate a story that will actually draw you in to being interested, and we should practice that. We should learn how to do that effectively in ways that will communicate, not the old-fashioned hit your head in the Bible type of thing, you know, but ways that will work. So we definitely do need zeal, because nothing happens if we don't. So now I want to finish with this, mobilizing soul winners. I went to a Bible school back when Ken Chant was in Vision College in Launceston, so that's a long time ago, because Vision College in Sydney. And it was an excellent college. I did that right through. And he has some excellent booklets that were part of the study courses. And one of them was called Building the Church God Wants. And something in there changed my life. And I'm going to read it to you now, because I can't think of a better way of saying what needs to be said on this topic than quoting directly from Ken Chant's excellent teaching on mobilizing soul winners. Let me read this to you and see if it has the effect on you that it had on me. Now, bear in mind, if anybody knows Ken Chant, I've had Ken Chant preach in my church. He's a brilliant teacher. I mean, he's a godly scholar. And he's dry as all look at. He's almost void of all emotion. You can't... Anybody know Ken Chant? Alison's a bit brighter, but, you know, this is going to take... I'm sorry, Ken, Alison, I love you both. But, you know, he's dry and blunt, you see. And in his pre-Christian history, or pre-pastoral history, he was Barry Chant's brother, of course. He's a bit more personality-driven, but he was an accountant. So that says it all. Sorry, it's gone off, is it? It's good. Okay, I'm not going to hurt anybody if I read this out. One way to help each member of a congregation to find his or her proper place is to reduce all ministries and offices in the church to 4 major functions: evangelist, shepherd, exhorter, and servants. Evangelist, shepherd, exhorter, and servants. I know we're a little over time, we're finishing now. But first, here is an illustration of the principle on which I built this premise. Many years ago, I worked as an accountant of a group of furniture stores in the suburbs of Melbourne. The firm had at least 100 other employees. Some of them worked as shop salespeople, others sold on commission from door to door, others drove trucks, packed goods, repaired damaged items, and so on. Then there were the handful of us who worked in the administration building. I was employed there for over a year, during which time I never once saw any shops, nor a single item they sold, not even one customer. How did that happen? Simply because my job was upstairs in the accountants department in a separate head office building. The nearest shop was miles away from where I worked, so ledgers, journals, accounts, and countless columns of numbers engaged all my attention. Yet no one in the organisation was any more committed than I to the success of its primary core business, which was to sell domestic furniture and hardware to the citizens of suburban Melbourne. Now imagine this scene. Suppose the owner has called all his workers into his office to rebuke them for declining sales. The task of this business, he roars, is to sell goods. A downturn in our profits cannot be tolerated. I want our sales turnover doubled in the next few weeks. All of you drop whatever you're doing and get out onto the streets and sell, sell, sell. So we all down tools, clerks, drivers, packers, merchants, bookkeepers, typists, shop assistants, and off we go to join the commission sales agents, cold canvassing the streets of Melbourne, trying to persuade reluctant customers to buy our goods. If such a thing were to be done, what do you suppose would happen to the business? You know the answer: swift chaos and total ruin. True, the success of the enterprise did depend upon constant growth in its sales, but there was only one way to achieve that goal. Each employee had to do well just the job he or she was employed to do. And this is why we need to know where we fit in the body of Christ and what our ministry roles are. In my case, that meant balancing the books of accounts to the last penny each month, which was done. There was no need for me ever to see a customer or sell a chair. Indeed, I would have harmed the corporation and not helped it if I had abandoned the job in which I was skilled, accounting, and taken up a job for which I was ill-suited, commission selling. Of course, the story is silly. No owner in his right mind would do anything so foolish. To find such ridiculous behaviour in real life, you have to visit the church, where you see it in operation constantly. That had a profound effect on me. From the day I did this, in the late 70s, I decided that I wanted to do what I could do to forward the gospel and use the skill set that I have. So I'm involved in the music. I'm preaching now. I'm involved I'm the treasurer. I'm involved in the books. I'm involved in lots of other peripheral things, none of which are knocking on doors. I have people I talk to at work. I have people I associate with, and I do share my faith. But I don't share it like I know gifted people do. But I think I'm part of the process. And I'm very good at what I do. But it's not me who's special. Everybody's good at something. We just have to know who we are and what God has called us to do. And do it with a passion. Do it with enthusiasm. Do it with zeal. And we can change the world. We can